Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth and marketing with business owners, thought leaders and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Oh, hi, everyone, and welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Anna Harrison. Anna, how are you going?
Hey, Saul, I'm great. And thanks for having me on today. Excited to explore where we take this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. I think we've known each other for a little while now, but I guess one of the things that I guess on this podcast that I personally always find really interesting initially, and it's really helpful for the audience, people listening to the podcast, is just to hear your story about what you've obviously done in the past and where you came to be where you are now. So that's probably a good starting point for everyone listening who hasn't met you before, who hasn't heard about you and Ramp as well. That's Ramp with 2 M's. So if you want to...
Hard to get a URL these days, right?
Yes.
So it's not that we're an extra long Ramp. It's just that Ramp with 1 M is taken. So
it does have that effect, though. It's Ramp.
It does. It implies a lot more upward action, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, so let everyone know. Give everyone initially just an overview about who you are and your journey to date would be great.
Well, I've had a long life, so this could be a very, very long conversation. So I'm going to give you the highlights and maybe start.
We have plenty of time.
And work our way forwards. Sure. Seeing as we are both sitting in Brisbane, I'll start my story there. So I finished high school and did an IT degree many, many moons ago at University of Queensland. Sort of went down that pathway and then moved overseas. So worked in London and New York City right around the time, for anyone listening who's old enough to remember the last time the world was going to end in 1999. It was a good time if you were in IT.
Y2K.
Yeah, Y2K, that's it. Here we are 23 years later, right? So started out in technology and very quickly moved into sort of pre-sales and systems design and those sort of roles. What happened then? Then I came back to Brisbane very briefly, and then life took me to Las Vegas, of all places. So I lived in Las Vegas and each week flew to San Francisco to work for a digital advertising company, not in the sense that you're probably thinking right now with Facebook and all that kind of stuff, but we were building a connected network of outdoor billboards and like an eBay for buying time slots on these billboards. So very much ahead of its time, fun kind of job. And then from there, I moved into designing a system which later got bought out by IBM. It's called TriRigger, and it's a facilities management system. And the curious thing about that, I started working with architects and architectural models and CAD designs and all of that. And I just realized that I should have been an architect. This technology stuff is not for me. So, enter the next decade when my kids were very little, and I actually ran a residential design practice, right? So it was like this strange pivot in my life. It was exciting. Wow. It was really fun. And I really loved the process of designing homes for people. And, through that, you learn very quickly that a home design isn't at all about designing a home. It's about designing someone's extension of themselves and how they want to be perceived in the world. And so in that regard, I guess you could say retrospectively, certainly not at the time, but retrospectively, I sort of became really, really good at the marketing of architecture, right? And so that sort of started.
Which is kind of rare too for architects mostly.
Yes, exactly. Like most architecture is designed to look good in a still photograph, right? Architecture still to this day is designed to look beautiful in an architectural magazine, right? There's no function, there's no form, there's no workflow that gets considered in the home. And so it was an interesting space. I really loved doing that. But, after a decade, A, my kids went to school, and so I'm like, I've got more time. And B, I realized being a starving artist needs to end. I've done my decade of charity work, right?
Yeah. I feel you.
Yeah, exactly. So and it's these moments. I was speaking to a friend the other day, and you know how sometimes you have moments in life where you can't ever go back to the stranger and tell them, thank you, you changed my life. Right. So I was sitting at the school event next to a woman who I don't know. I still to this day don't know, but she completely affected the trajectory of what happened in my life next. She her kids were a little bit older, and she turned to me and she said, this is a great moment in life to do something to reinvent yourself in a career sense. Like, go do a PhD, go do something and just pivot. You've got nothing to lose. And I thought, that's a really good idea. So away I went. I knocked on QUT's door and I said, hey, I've done 10 years of work in residential architecture. How about you you excuse me from the first 4 years of an architecture degree and just allow me to do the last 2? And they said, no, thanks, lady. Not surprisingly enough. I'm like, but look at my portfolio. And they said, no, thanks, lady. But anyway, I was persistent. And so I ended up chatting with some people and getting connected to the design team at QUT. And I did, long story short, I did a PhD in experience design in airports, right? So that was fascinating. It was like, again, it was like a moment where I got the opportunity to slightly pivot what it was that I was doing. And so that process led me to get a really solid understanding of experience design, what it is to create great experiences, and how to create great experiences that are commercially beneficial, right? So I guess you could look at it as a win-win for both sides of the equation. And through that, sort of came back full circle to technology, and here we are today, right?
That's a really interesting trajectory too. I think, especially for me, I guess being somebody like I sort of strongly relate to the like having a range of interests in different things equally too. Like I always I never really relate, although I understand like intellectually the idea. I mean, people talk about you should really focus on one thing, be really good at it, and all that sort of stuff. But like I think it's especially when things relate strongly too. Like I can see when you were talking about those things, there's for me and really obvious correlation between even though on the face of it people might go with architecture and user experience design and or like experience design, that they don't relate, but I see a really strong correlation between those things in, I guess, because when I think about them, if you're talking about like the human level of it, like you were before, that the experience that you want somebody to have, and the rest is just, I mean, it's not incidental, of course, but it's not then the driving thing behind it. Like you said, it's not it might end up being an amazing looking house anyway, or an amazing looking, sort of airport, or just the process that somebody goes to. But like I can see like the link there between those things.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the many conversations we used to have, and actually how I ended up in the design school is I was speaking to the dean of QUT at the time, and one of his strong viewpoints was that the foundational years for architecture and computer science are exactly the same, right? And it's so true. So to your point, Saul, the process of creating and designing a technology system and creating and designing an experience and creating and designing an architecture, the lived experience in the physical rather than the virtual world, the actual thought process that you would apply is really incredibly similar in all of those things. So you're right, while it looks like very random segues here and there was a thread that ran through all of those different career iterations, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I would find that too when I'd be listening to people that I know in business who were builders, like even some of the ways they would talk about their processes, and even though they were dealing like in the physical world with building something, I'll be like, wow, that's really eerily familiar to how I talk about websites, or how I talk about like, an app design and development. It sounds like really, really similar. And there's like a bunch of really similar sort of issues that crop up. Although one's virtual and one's physical, they were eerily similar. And I used to always sort of marvel at that too, because same thing, like on the face of it, two polar opposites seemingly, but like there's these core things that if you, I guess, you tap into and do them well, then you've got the human centered kind of outcome maybe that you want, or that you should have.
For sure. And, I think that you raise an interesting issue or question, and that is, how do you evaluate the success of a website, right? Just like how do you evaluate the success of a home? Is it the static, beautiful image that you see in an architecture magazine? Is it, the beautiful landing page that you land on that has very lovely colors? Or is it the experience that it provides to the audience and then the commercial benefit that it delivers to the business owner, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's the space that has become my focus in the last maybe 10 years or so. And it's interesting to see those threads all roll together. So let's play a game. Are you open to that?
I love games.
Okay, excellent. All right. So I'm going to ask you a question, and you can answer this either truly or make up an answer. It really doesn't matter. But close your eyes for a moment and think back to a time when you were going on dates, right? And just try and remember the worst ever first date that you have ever been on.
It's quite clear, yeah.
Okay, yeah, right. All right. Tell us about it if you're willing to share. Protect the names to keep those.
Oh, sure. Sure, why not? I'll expose myself. I'll be vulnerable. Yeah, no, I was, worst and best. I, sort of met somebody at a party and having a great time. Won't go into the gory details, but then all of a sudden, at the sort of crucial point of first kiss, being sick, being literally physically sick, and
okay,
worst possible thing that could almost happen.
Right.
At that point, and just like being, confused, like we'd, had lot to drink, and then just being ashamed, and then, how do I get out of this? And then confused.
Okay, so let me just capture that, right? So your worst ever first date, everything is going well. You get to a moment where you're about to convert the first date into something a little bit more, and you vomit all over her shoes, right? There is no recovery from that, right? So
to convert, yes.
Exactly. So, had that happened a year after you were dating or 2 years after you were dating, it probably wouldn't be a relationship killer, right? But because it happened on the first date, it's like, there is no way this is ever progressing to anything else, right?
But it did.
What?
It did, yeah.
No. Did you marry her?
No.
Oh,
that was my only other, no. But fortunately not with my wife. But no, it did. Yeah. And it was actually like very forgiving, and so I was like, ooh, close call.
All right, you're in the one of the lucky few category, right? But the point of the game is that in human life, right, in real life, even though we spend a lot of our time on Zoom these days, but in real life, there are rules of engagement when it comes to relationships, right? And typically, if you had told me that was the end, like there was no turning back from that moment where you vomited on the girl's shoes on the first date just before going in for the kiss, we would have all gone, oh, of course, yeah, that makes perfect sense, right? The fact that you had a bit of a run, terrific. It just shows you must have been a pretty decent and forgiving person. But, the point there is that we understand what the rules of creating good relationships are in real life. And yet when we jump into a digital space, we very often forget that, and we violate all those same rules, right? So maybe another example, and I'm glad to hear this one didn't happen, but, if you were to go on a first date and you show up and you've ironed your shirt and you've remembered to have a shower, terrific, you feel like you're winning, the date's going well, and then you pop the question on the first date and you're like, hey, you seem terrific, shall we get married and have 7 kids? Right. It's probably going to be less forgiving than vomiting on her shoes. So the other person is likely to go, I don't understand what flavor of crazy this is, but it's not for me. Thanks very much. And so again, right, like we understand that in real life, and we would expect the outcome that naturally happens when it's person to person. But when we jump into digital and we create websites, right? We forget all of these rules. So, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, what makes for a successful website? I'm going to, my perspective, and happy for this to be challenged and, challenged to everyone listening. But to me, a successful website is one that can create a really rich relationship with your audience. Right. So, and a rich relationship through extension creates higher conversion rates. Right. So you're delivering something which in a digital space creates a wonderful experience. And ultimately, for your business to be strong and to grow and to thrive, you've got to have a mechanism that takes strangers that arrive at your website and turn them into loyal brand advocates, buyers, and fans. Right? So to me, that is what a successful website looks like.
Yeah, I mean that's a good, in a nutshell, sort of thing. And I would certainly agree with that. I'd probably say at this point then too, for for the people listening not in our industry, could be, well, yeah, I generally understand that, and I generally understand like the word brand, and I generally understand the word digital, and I generally understand the word website, and I know what all those things are, and I definitely know about email. But like, then when those things come together, would you be able to break it down, say from your perspective on a successful website and building that sort of loyalty? This is probably a good segue to start to go a little bit into to Ramp too, as to what Ramp actually does, because whilst I've got a pretty clear idea too, I mean, I certainly want to find out more as well. And I think perhaps explaining Ramp will also answer these questions. But just
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. I'm going to start with a spoiler alert. I'm going to give you the answer, but then I'll tell you a story and then come back to where we are, right?
Oh, that's okay. Then people can always fast forward and then go back if they like. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So spoiler alert, in short, at Ramp, we've cracked the code for how to digitize human relationships, right? So we've got a piece of AI that will look across your website and actually answer that question for you. How much do your site visitors love you? Where are the strong parts of your relationship? Where are the weak parts in your relationship? And more importantly, what can you do to fix the weaknesses? Right. So that's what we've done at Ramp. But let me kind of zoom out of that and tell you a little story. So, and it's a true story, right? So we have conversations. Ramp is a tool which can be used by either a business, so like a brand, or by a digital agency. So those are both kind of two different target audiences for us. And in our conversations with digital agencies, we have had a number of conversations with very large digital agencies. So, there's a few around the world, like the WPPs and the Publicis Sapiens and so on. And to give everyone listening a sense, these types of agencies typically work with clients like Coca-Cola, Nike, and so on. And clients like Coca-Cola and Nike can literally say, oh, agency X over here will give you an annual budget of $10 million. Good luck. Right. And so the agency will put together a team of people, and typically there'll be 5 or 6 people servicing, Coca-Cola at this one agency. Coca-Cola has 10 of these agencies, right? So at the one agency, there might be a team of 10 people, and these people could be designers, designers, developers, and data scientists, usually. And so they're looking at all the data and sifting through, and based on that team working on this one client, they will put together insights which help Coca-Cola understand effectively how they are doing in their relationship with their target audience, where the weaknesses are, and what they should do about fixing those weaknesses, right? That's terrific. And if you're a brand in the top 2% and you can afford to speculate $10 million on an agency for some data scientists to do work, terrific. And so, but yes, you're smiling, I'm laughing as well. 98% or perhaps even 99% of the world's businesses don't have that type of marketing budget, but they still have ambitions to grow. And so what we have created at Ramp is a way for regular brands, the ones without unlimited budgets, to access these kinds of insights and to have confidence around knowing, where are the weaknesses in our relationship with our target audience and what can we do about fixing them. Right? this is where it comes back to, we've cracked the code on how to digitize human relationships, and everything inside Ramp is based on a piece of AI that looks at on the basis of analytics. So it's all evidence-based, not opinion-based. We look at your Google Analytics and a couple of other markers and give you an instant read on how are you tracking, and that way it allows, so for example, for an agency like Roundhouse, you can have, you can access Ramp, you can run a Ramp report for one of your clients and have confidence in understanding where is the relationship between that client's website and their audience outperforming, where is it underperforming, and then what should we do next month to shift the needle and to fix it. And then, of course, because it's all evidence-based, you get a metric, right? So you know that the work we did last month has helped us to improve this weak point in the relationship by 7.5% or what have you. And through that process and working with hundreds of high growth brands in the last couple of years, we've been able to consistently shift conversion rates for brands. Coming back to that strong relationship with higher conversion rate, we've been able to shift conversion rates by 10, 20, 30, 40%. So
yeah, so I see. Also, I was reading a little bit about the adore process, which I kind of like. I like the sound of that. Sounds very lovely. But like the actual is, am I right in assuming that is the does that represent the core sort of AI element of?
Absolutely,
it does. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the adore process is what we have patented. Right. And, adore, love, how much do your site visitors love you? How much do they adore you? It's all, it's all part of that. And so the adore process is that codification of the human relationship, right? How do we as human beings form a relationship? And in a human to human way, and I'll step you through that process in a second if you're interested, but in a human way, it's very natural. In a digital way, it's measurable. Right. So, if I was to say any human relationship, you've got to start with an opportunity to meet. Right. Like if there is no opportunity to meet, whether it's a virtual phone call, whether it's a coffee, whether it's standing behind someone in the coffee shop line, you've got to start with an opportunity. If there's no opportunity, there's no relationship. Right. So that's step one. And then step two of that process is the first impression. Right? If you don't pass the first impression in a human way, there is no coffee, there is no dinner, there is no, hey, let's move in together and have 7 kids. Right? You've got to pass the first impression. Right? So I don't know how you pass the first impression with vomiting on someone's shoes, but let's leave that as a mystery for the universe.
Yes. I often ponder about that. Yeah. But I would put that. I like to put like that kind of, I guess, like that as an extreme metaphor for some of the things we're talking about is interesting too, because I guess my next question on that, when if you don't have this step, then you can't go to the next one. Does Ramp have or the sort of AI? I guess I'm making an assumption here that it would also be able to work out, or at least have some data to sort of also understand how, in the, say, smaller amount of circumstances, even though like in that instance, theoretically, in 99.9% of cases, it shouldn't have moved forward, but it did. So say if you take that to a website, and circumstances that, there's a whole number of these that I could sort of run through when, say, people have, say, come to our website or come to somebody's website, and despite the fact that it's not optimized for any sort of conversion, or it's not doing what, Ramp would measure and go, yeah, that's a great next step, let's move forward. It's not doing any of that stuff. They still go forward. So does Ramp then like have some way, I guess, like I'm because I like to try to understand things for myself, so I get it sort of straight in my head, how, or first of all, does it? And then if it does, without giving away like the AI secrets, which I don't expect you to do, like how does it then, or can it sort of analyze those little tiny aberrations, like if you will, like of it's still actually going ahead?
Yeah. The answer is yes. Right. So yes, the answer is yes. Happy to divulge the secrets. The secrets are all divulged in I've written a book which was published last year in New York.
Oh, yeah.
Digital Brand Romance. If anyone can't sleep at night, I really welcome you to read that, and it'll solve all your problems. And you'll learn.
Downloaded that today. Actually, I'm going to read.
There you go. Yeah, so you will have no trouble sleeping. So all the secrets to the adore process are divulged in there. Knock yourself out. So yes, and coming back to your point, which is that okay, and you happen to have a perfect example. In this particular case, that relationship should not have gone ahead, right? The vomit on the shoes, going in for the first conversion should not have happened, right? And so what happens if that happens in a digital sense, right? We might have a website which is not optimized for conversion, and, we're still making sales. And so, so what, right? Well, a couple of things. The first so what is you could be making a lot more sales. So, if you're satisfied with your, global average conversion rates are around 2.35%, which most people accept, and they're like delighted by 2.35% conversion rates. And maybe it's because I lived in Vegas, I don't know, but to me that sounds like a 96.75 or whatever. I can't do maths. Call it a 97% failure rate, right?
Yeah.
Like the only other place I've heard people boast about such big failure rates are casinos in Vegas, which promise you that you will lose, that you will lose 99 cents in the dollar.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so digital marketing, the returns are the same. You're guaranteed that 97% of your marketing dollars will be ineffective, right? So what if you could make...
It's kind of crazy, isn't it?
It's crazy. No one talks about this. No one sits down.
Probably for good reason.
Right, but no one says, hang on a second, every $100 I put into Google AdWords, I'm guaranteed that 97 of those 100 hard-earned dollars are going to be wasted because I'm accepting a conversion rate of 3%. And so, looking at the inefficiency in the space, yes, you're probably still making sales. And yes, maybe you're making enough sales to pay all the bills and cover expenses and so on. But what if you could shift that conversion rate from 3% to 30%? That's a direct impact on your bottom line, right? That's exciting. That's really interesting.
Have to employ some more people.
Well, yes, and you can either employ more people or you can use Ramp and work with a great digital agency like Roundhouse. I'm saying there's other options. So, the whole idea is that we don't want to increase headcount. Instead of increasing headcount, we want to make the insights available to a larger sector of the business world. And so that's the space, that's the universe that we want to make a dent in, and that's the universe that we are making a dent in. So, first of all, the question was, hey, you can have these inefficient websites that still make money. So absolutely you can, but wouldn't it be exciting if you could 10x your profits, right, by making the pipeline more efficient? Effectively, what we're doing is making the conversion pipeline, customer journey, marketing funnel, whatever your words for describing that process are, more efficient. So if you leak less, your 3% conversion rates turns into 30% conversion rates, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing is, does Ramp pick that up? And the answer to that is yes and, right? So we pick up. So coming back to the adore process, there are 6 critical milestones in the adore process that get measured through Ramp. So you get a score for each of those markers. And then what Ramp does is it tells you which of those 6 milestones or which of those moments where your relationship is weak is the most expensive, right? So your first impression might be, subpar, but you might have milestone number 4 or 5 that's even more subpar. So Ramp will give you a sense of what is the piece of work that we should do next that's going to give us the biggest ROI on spend. So, effectively fix the most expensive leak in your funnel first. And that isn't necessarily working on the first impression. It might be something further downstream. So as an example of that, you might have, and this is a real example, an app that, everything is going well. They're spending a lot on marketing. People are downloading the app, and then 95% of people who download the app continue to not use it. They don't finish onboarding. Again, we know of real examples like this because it's not unusual. And so in that regard, RAMP will point you to the onboarding process and say, this is your most expensive leak, fix it first. You then still need to work with an agency to fix the leak. We are only a diagnostic. We're not in the business of fixing things. And so you work through the process, and if you can shift the needle there, you're actually plugging up one of the most expensive leaks in your funnel. And in this particular case, the business, once they had awareness around what to fix, they made some very, very simple UX changes that unblocked a few things in their onboarding process, and their revenue went up like really significantly as a result of that.
It's really it's sort of really interesting to me too, on the talking about brand, where brand and digital services meet, because we do a lot of branding, and often the projects are sort of intertwined. There's talk about branding, and there's talk about brand loyalty. There's talking about your why, and all those things that are in, I guess, in many ways for most people, when they talk about them, it's like sort of talking about art. It's like it's sort of subjective, and there's these sort of things that don't really relate to data, I guess, for most people. I mean, like for some people, no, that's not true, but that's usually people that work in sort of our industry, who think about things in a different sort of way. Like a builder thinks about building a house, or the plumber's like fixing a pipe. Like he's looking at it, and I'm just going, there's like stuff coming out of it, and you just fix it. I don't know anything else. But so where would you say? I know this is a pretty open-ended sort of question, but you can like break it down into a range of different like cool parts. Please, Anna.
All right. I'll take on the challenge.
Take on answering my super open-ended question.
Yep.
Of which is that, like, where, like, for RAMP, for when it is diagnosing sort of issues, how does like the world of brand and somebody's brand that is represented on the website in, whatever form, visually, language-wise, other that is, how does that mix in with like other technical aspects of like your version of PHP and WordPress is out of date? Is there this that's making it slow? Like all those mechanical sort of things. Where do those two things meet?
So I think there's a few different layers. Let me take your open-ended question and pull it apart a little bit, and hopefully if I get through this and we haven't answered everything, pull me up, right? So I think one of the first things you raised was this idea that, branding and I'm going to lump marketing into that, but marketing, design, branding are all fairly subjective fields. They're fuzzy. They don't have the precision that mathematics has. And so how do you measure success objectively rather than subjectively? And I'm starting there because this is like very, very exciting to me personally, because it's actually one of the problems that we set out to solve, right? So it's like, well, and I'll tell you a little story here. So I'll share a story. I think around 8 years ago, I was involved in helping a client set up an ophthalmology practice, right? And at the time, we were working on different aspects of it. And one of the things they were just tearing their hair out because they had a marketing agency on retainer. They were paying, I think, 20 grand a month, which, it's not an insignificant amount of money, even for doctors, right? So 20 grand a month going out the door to this on a retainer to this marketing agency. And they're just tearing their hair out. They're like, we don't know what we're paying for, but we feel like we need to pay this because the marketing agency is telling us that we must do marketing and we're not seeing any benefit. So what do we do? And then the other issue that came up for this particular client, and then again over the last during COVID, I worked with hundreds of brands out of New Zealand. So I was the digital technology advisor to the country of New Zealand. And, through that, got to work with a lot of high growth brands. So brands that were exporting into other geographies. And the thing that came up most often for them as well was this sense of, they would come to me and say, I need marketing. And it's like, well, what does that mean? So part of the issue that we have is that we have a fuzzy industry that's very fragmented.
Yep.
And until, we can say you need marketing, you need design, but what does that actually mean, right? So you go down to that next layer and you go, well, performance marketing is very, very different to marketing strategy. And that's really different to brand design and identity design. And that's really different to copywriting. And that's really different to graphic design, which is not at all the same as web design and let alone web development. So I've listed 7 things there. And the critical thing about those things is that they're all different skill sets. They're all different capabilities. They probably require different people to do a really good job of each of those, because it's hard to find someone who's a, amazing marketing performance person, understands SEO, CRO, is a great graphic designer, stellar copywriter. They can, and they can implement the website for you. Like, those people don't exist. So at best, you're working with an agency that has a broad range of capabilities. But from a client's perspective, and if I'm sitting in the shoes of a business owner and I run an ophthalmology practice, all I know is that I need marketing, or all I know is that I need design. And I have no way of evaluating success other than the lag sort of, the lag effect of on my revenue and my profits, but that can sometimes take a long time. So how do we solve for that today, right? How do we bring a bit of objectivity into a fragmented space where words are bantered around and they all mean different things to different people? And then to execute well on all of those different words, you need really different capabilities, right? So if you take that and, I'm sure most people listening are nodding their heads going, yep, I get this. I'm like confused about what to do next, and everyone I speak to tells me a different story. Because a web developer will tell you that you need a new version of PHP and some more plugins into WordPress, whereas a branding agency will tell you that absolutely you need a rebrand, right? And so how do you make sense of that and make objective decisions? And so I'm going to come back to RAMP now only because, in that ADORE model, the 6 milestones, one of the benefits of RAMP is that we not only measure your performance at each of those milestones, so you have a sense of where your relationship is weak, but we also then match each of the milestones towards the kind of agency or capability that you need to make a fix. So, for example, first impression, right? First impression, we understand what that means in a human way, right? I think there's like hundreds of variables that get processed by your mind subconsciously. And at the end of all of that, you get a sense of, yep, I'm going to continue talking to this person, or no, they're creepy and I'm going to run away, right? So you land on a website, you also get a first impression. And that first impression is made up of things like your value proposition, which are the words. It's made up of the imagery and all the subtle things like the fonts, the branding, and it's really a very quick assessment of, does this align with my expectations? Does this align with my expectations of what I'm looking for? And on the one hand, it's subjective, but on the other hand, we actually can measure success there. And once we can put metrics against that, you can start to do things like evaluate the success of a rebrand. So if an agency says to you, hey, you're really, your first impression score is really, really low, let's have a look at the branding, the aesthetic, the value proposition. We ship a change, and then a month later, we can come back and actually see in numbers and objectively the effectiveness or the impact of that change. And so in a way, we are bringing a little bit of objectivity and evidence-based measurement into a field which typically is associated with being very fuzzy and imprecise.
I think that's a great answer. And I think that, I think I'll just do a quick reevaluation in my mind to see if there's anything that we've missed. I think, I mean, I 100% agree. And I mean, it's a conversation that we and other colleagues have all the time, and it's why we then like working with like other partners who do marketing, because we might do strategic thinking and advising people on their on their brand, but we don't then do the implementation of
Mhm.
marketing. We like, making things visually and also making them work too. But the reality, I guess, of like outside of us knowing all that, of then when you come to a client and then saying you need this and that, then at the end of the day, then also comes down to how much they want to spend and how much they can spend too
Mhm.
on or what they can do at that time. But um which I know is often seems like a barrier then to people, but um like little steps are always great anyway, aren't they?
Mhm.
In terms of just like even knowing, like you explaining all that relating to ramp for me, like in my role, is regardless of whether somebody could do or had the will to or was able to do something about that straight away, at least they're then a step ahead.
Mhm.
They're still like a step ahead to know something really, really, really important, that they didn't know before and could be quite possibly the catalyst then to do something about it, because then they
Mhm.
uh,
Well,
actually know what the
exactly.
problem is.
That's it. And I think that's the salient point right there. If you know what the problem is, and maybe expanding on that, if you understand what the most expensive problem to fix is at this point in time. So, like,
Right. Yeah,
you
even
know,
more important point. Yeah.
exactly. So, like, again, it's very, very common. Like, you work with brands, and, I'm talking about the segment of the business world where you might have a marketing person in house. You have marketing budget, right? So, if you don't have marketing budget, it's very difficult to have any kind of conversation with an agency or anyone, right? So, you have some amount of marketing budget. Maybe you have a dedicated marketing person in house, but maybe not. You're possibly working with external agencies who you have a relationship, you trust them, and so on. Or maybe you're working with someone where you're not getting enough traction, but that's kind of the scenario. So let's leave off the table the brands and the businesses that have 30 people in their marketing department, because that's, so parking that. So the types of brands I'm talking about, and that audience where they have some budget and they have some access to marketing, design, and broad strokes, that area of capability, digital capability. Um, Typically for those types of brands, the hardest thing for them to work out is, what should we do next? Like, what is the thing that is most worth doing next? Because
Next most
in front
important
of us,
steps.
exactly, like in front of us is Mount Everest. We have a roadmap with like 37 different projects that we want to do. We don't have the manpower in house to do all of that. We don't have the budget to hire 57 different agencies all at the same time to do the work. And so the problem really comes down to, what is the problem that's worth solving, and what is the one that's going to give us the biggest ROI on our spend next month?
Yeah, I guess that's yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's even, I know, even personally, when you're, let alone for clients, which you can very easily recognize, of giving people, me included, too much information too soon can be completely paralyzing,
Mhm.
to go, well, or the emotional reaction is often, well, I'll just think about that like next year sometime. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
that's just, well, that's just like too much. I've got all this other stuff going on. I've got this and that. I've got to do client work. I've got to, and then people in their small business, or for that matter, any size business, and perhaps I would probably say even more so in a different way sometimes with bigger businesses, when somebody higher up the chain who's had zero to do with what's going on in the marketing department, who then all of a sudden one day has got a bit of like spare time up their sleeve, and they're going, let's have a look at what's going on. And yeah, I can see somebody's probably like flashback,
Yeah.
to, yeah, where
So
people they go, yeah, should really see what John's doing in the marketing department goes down and say, what's going on? And it's just like, oh my God, finally have to, it hasn't been working out because I don't know what's going on. And then there's like a bunch of questions that need to be answered. And then maybe he's gone to somebody and they've said, you got to do all these things. And then John, who is sort of in the know more than the person up the chain, then the person up the chain is like, well, that just sounds like, though I would imagine a common response, which I guess I've seen too, is, they need to understand then, or they want to understand, but then they're not in a position to be able to. So then it becomes even worse, in many ways, because there's an element of Chinese whispers in there too. Of someone said this, they may have said it some months ago. By that point, it's not even translated correctly, even if the information in the first place was accurate or good, which it may not have been. It may have been like partially. Then it gets down to here, and I 100% agree. And my open-ended question a while back about like where brand and that meets was, I guess I asked that mainly because of like how you actually answered it, in the sense that there's so many ambiguous things that are so fluid that the things that you can count on or that you can actually analyze, then at least the things you can do, you should do, and that you can work out from there. And then you can, do testing. You can go, here's this key point that's not working. We don't know. We'll just accept and go, we don't 100% know yet. Brand agency, should really, you want to kind of exude confidence about something, and you'd be like, we feel this is good, but do you 100% know? Of course you don't. No, you don't.
Oh, absolutely. There's no silver bullet, right? Like there is not if anyone in the world says to you, I know exactly what you need to 10x your conversion rates, they're probably pulling the wool over your eyes. There's absolutely an element of experimentation, right? But being able to point to data and objective metrics allows all the opinion to be taken out, right? So it allows you to set up experiments and test those experiments month on month to see which of the actions that we're putting forward are going to actually help us to build a stronger relationship with the target audience, right? Which things are helping us to lead towards that and which things are not. And so if Jack or John or Mary or whoever comes down from upstairs and says, hey, this month we should be doing this because I've got to spare 10 minutes and I'm pivoting the team, right? That's terrific. And you can take that on board. But ultimately, you can point at metrics and say, this is what we're working on right now. We're fixing the most expensive leak. And this is the uplift that we've had since we started the project. And in the 3 months, we've made this much progress. Right? So it's really helpful not only to ease the burden of reporting, because right now reporting success in this whole digital field is incredibly hard. And again, open to interpretation and opinion, and everyone who does it differently, and it takes a week to pull together a management report, and who has time for that, right? So getting that straight out of the box by using a tool that ingests your analytics and gives you a sense of, here's your read on the 6 important metrics that have to do with how we form relationships. Here's how you've improved or perhaps not improved since last month. Like knowing that you've gone backwards gives you a sense of, hey, whatever we're doing, the experiment we're trying in this space in the last month isn't working. Let's try something else.
What would you say then, I guess, also to a key point that seems to, like it crops up a lot in our industry too, for people who are doing reporting and they're doing analytics, and then they say, and even if they're then saying, and we should try this, after a certain point in time, most, clients or people on the receiving end of that information will be starting to question whether, like that process is just there to generate further work for the agency, or whether it's really legitimately actually doing some good. So I imagine like with Ramp, it seems, and you can fill in the blanks here as to Ramp being able to provide information, but also then to give um, more substantial suggestions for how to fix those things instead of like a seemingly endless cycle, which I'm not saying, because there's a lot of people that do that really like think about things really properly, but I'm talking about more the perception on the other
Yeah,
end
yeah, for sure.
about that it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And they're saying it's a hard problem to solve, but like, is it really that hard?
Mhm.
Like that sort of
Yeah,
response.
100%. And, it comes back to that story about the ophthalmology clinic where the marketing agency was just saying, keep paying us a retainer, it'll eventually be good. And you're like, well, at what point do I go, is it? Like, where's the evidence? And so I think that's a really salient and interesting point. And that is that one of the reasons why we have made the strategic decision to be an impartial diagnostic. So we are not in the business of providing consulting services. We don't fix any of the fixes because we realize that, that breaks our credibility instantly. We can't be recommending to do a
Yeah,
fix
true. Yeah.
and then, jumping in and doing the fix ourselves. That would completely compromise us. So we provide the diagnostic, which then as an agency or as a brand, you can use the diagnostic knowing that it is objective. Like we don't gain anything from any fix that's implemented. And there is enough, the guidance inside Ramp that comes out of the box will give you strategic direction, and it walks you through. It effectively allows you to collate an informed brief, right? So if you're a brand and you use Ramp, it will take you through the process and allow you to know who to work with and what kind of piece of work you want to ask them to do, right? So the high level brief. For an agency, it's the same. It allows you to educate the client around what is the piece of work that we ought to be doing next. This is what it looks like in broad strokes. But the work itself, it's still up to the agency to execute on the creative aspect of that, right? So we can say the direction you need to go in is a rebrand and check the copywriting on your value proposition. And these are the kinds of questions that you might want to think about as you're working with your brand or agency. But the work and the magic is still up to the agency to perform. And again, because recognizing that the work is always experimental in nature, it's really wonderful to approach the entire, I guess, relationship with your client. And this is where becoming a trusted strategic partner is really important, right? So I will come to Roundhouse because I want advice and execution on what to do, not just because I want a new website, but because I want you guys to tell me what type of things should I be putting into my website to create a strong relationship, to create a great experiences, to improve conversion rates. Right.
Yeah.
And so through that process, you still allow you 100% rely on the agency to do what they do really well. Right. But it provides a little bit of structure and objective guidance as to what exactly should we be working on next to make sure that we're plugging up all the leaks in the funnel.
Yeah. I think that's like for me anyway, that's like a bit of a almost, maybe secret source isn't the right sort of term, but it's like the missing little bit sort of in the recipe for a lot of people, because like there's big questions about, it's about, like, even if you then say, like we were saying before, there's look, we've been refining this particular aspect of your campaign or your website, and we're seeing these results, and then 3 or 4 months down the track, you're still saying the same thing, and that might still be true. That might still be, that's actually what's happening. Like, people aren't pulling the wool over anyone's eyes. Like, that's what's happening, but that's still, regardless, a very hard sell to people who aren't in the know, and especially, and then triply, quadruply so for people who really don't like thinking about or interacting with technology. They just find it frustrating and they get angry, and they just I just don't want to talk about, and but having information and evidence that can be, shown and have a direct correlation. I guess this gets back a little bit to my question about brand too, and I do actually have a clarification on that, which is when when you're talking about, say, for example, the specific metrics, when, like, say, probably relates to, like, the bounce rate, when somebody comes into your website and then they leave straight away. Would you say, from your current information and things that you've learned via RAMP, that there's a direct correlation in whole, or at least in part, with just purely the visual aspect of what they experience when they first come into a site, and the content too? My impression has generally always been in the first, because people don't read that quickly, and they don't read everything down there. They just come in and they see, they experience, they feel, and then they're in further, or then they're out. So, my general thinking has always been that that's just purely a visual experience, because that's all they're experiencing. So would that relate then straight away to, and does it make sense then to say there's a direct correlation then to the branding as a whole? Like the
Yeah, so I'll break that down a little bit. So the milestone inside RAMP, or inside the Adore process, right? If you look at the Adore process itself, the milestone that relates to branding is the first impression. So, first impression, first 10 seconds, it's probably really 6 seconds, but what happens there? And so there are definite ingredients that go into that, and branding in broad strokes is part of that. So when you think about you yourself, you go to a website, like anyone listening, you land on a website and you make a very quick assessment around, this website is going to steal my credit card and my identity, versus I'm going to stay a while and read a little bit more. Or I have no idea what they're selling. I'm not going to stick around because, look, there's a cute cat video, right? So yes, there's all of those ingredients of branding. Do you communicate the value to your target audience effectively enough in that first instant? And when you think about what goes into a first impression in a pragmatic, in a practical kind of sense in digital, it's the fonts, the colors, the images, what happens in that very first hero part of the website. So absolutely, branding is a large component of that. The inside RAMP, and if I look inside, kind of peel the layers back and look at, well, how does RAMP AI, or how does the Adore process measure that first impression? Bounce rates are an ingredient in that, but they're not the only ingredient. And so this is where you really need to work with a digital agency, because sometimes, like, your first impression score might be low, but it might not be because the branding and the value proposition aren't right. It could be because you've put a completely different marketing campaign in market, and the promise that you're making in the campaign
doesn't correlate.
It doesn't correlate, right?
Yeah,
so there's a cognitive dissonance. I'm clicking on a link that's promising me vanilla ice cream, and I'm landing in a place that's selling shoes. And you're like, what the? I was expecting vanilla ice cream. I must be in the wrong place. Let me walk out the door. Right. Yeah. So, it's not like something is going wrong. So I think even having awareness around the fact that we've changed nothing, but our first impression score has dropped, for example, that makes you think, hang on, well, if our first if that first impression score has dropped, and we haven't changed any branding, we haven't changed we haven't shipped anything different here, then that's a really clear indicator that we need to look at what happened before. Have we got something in market? Maybe it's as simple as the marketing campaign is sending people to the wrong landing page, right?
Yeah, just simple. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it sounds very sort of interesting overall as a tool, and I think, like, there's it's good that it sort of covers it in, from what I understand from what you're saying, in a sort of a really impartial way, which you can obviously do when you just have data. You've got the data, and then you dive in and work out where those paths go and what that might actually mean, which is always a little bit of a mystery. Sometimes it's really obvious, I guess. At first glance, it's much more obvious than other things. But sometimes it takes a bit more work to find that out. But a lot of it seems to relate back then to just overall trust, with ultimately how people trust anything, trust you or I, or trust their friends or family, or trust a stranger, or then go onto a website and, whilst it might seem insignificant to some people, like you said, if they click on a campaign, and even if that service is, this is like, sort of AdWords or, pay-per-click, simple, basic sort of things, like having a landing page that's talking about, what the ad says. It's using the same words. It's like, if I say something and you go and somebody else says, Saul didn't say that, he said this. And I'm like, hang on, what are you talking about?
Exactly. It's an immediate moment where that it is an
lose a little bit of trust.
Yeah,
it just goes down a little bit. Yeah, so if you are could you speak, I guess, a little bit more about say, if you've got any other sort of great stories about like the power of insights that people have actually gained, like, it can be another agency, it can be, just people who've found great insights, and it's had a really great correlation for them into real world results.
Oh, I can talk for hours, so careful what you wish for, Saul.
I wish you to tell me a story, Anna.
All right, I'm going to tell you a story. So I'm going to just go through my mental memory bank of stories and pick out some of the maybe most memorable, where we've had a really big impact. Like we've identified what is the issue, made the change. The change is typically really easy, and we've had a big impact as a result. So one of the things that, and so through, we're not yet at a point where we can give statistically significant data around making this kind of change on your website will result in this kind of uplift in conversion rates. So this is anecdotal, but I can tell you that these are patterns which I see over and over again. And every time they're fixed, they will give you a noticeable uplift in conversion rates. So for example, you land on a website, right, and you get 10 pop-up screens that say, sign up to a newsletter, get 10% off when you blah, blah, blah. You know what, you're laughing, you've been there, you've seen that, book a demo or talk to our consultants, right? Again, if you look at professional services or SaaS companies, everyone leads with book a demo, talk to a consultant. And the problem is that book a demo and talk to a consultant is quite an intimate thing. You don't go on a first date and ask for marriage, right? Whereas book a demo is marriage. And so you've got to take someone on a coffee date, and then you've got to take them out for dinner, and only then do you have the right to ask them to marry you, right?
I've never booked a demo ever.
Right? 100%, right? So that totally, speaks to that, because book a demo is too intimate. And so if you do nothing else, right, if people listening at home, if they do nothing else except call Saul up today and ask Saul to change book a demo to view a demo, and you play a pre-recorded demo, which is maybe a minute or 2 minutes long, and at the end of the demo, there's a call to action to book a demo, you're going to increase your demo bookings by a really significant amount. And so the times we've put this into play, the increase in demo bookings has been between 30 and 90%. Right? So real life examples, again, I'm not talking about businesses like Nike that have unlimited budgets. These are ordinary businesses that are just doing their best to get ahead and figure out what is the thing that we can change to significantly uplift things, conversion rates downstream. So book a demo is an easy one. And anything else where you lead, when you look at your website with fresh eyes, and if you're leading with things that ask for a really strong level of commitment, that's going to imply a low conversion rate. So you've got to put in place stepping stones that allow me as your site visitor to build trust with you, right? So give me something where I can engage with you in a soft way and maybe ask for my email, and then follow up with something else where maybe I'm getting to know you a little bit more and you're delivering more value to me. Maybe invite me to a webinar, right? And then you have the right to ask me for a bit more information about myself, which I'll be happy to give you because you're delivering value. And then all of a sudden you've taken me from stranger to someone who's quite familiar with you, right? And when you ask me to book a demo, it's a natural consequence. I'm ready for it. And so that's sort of, that whole genre is an example. I think another example that comes up often, and, you know, not to stereotype, but typically in professional services companies and areas where we have very hard technical products, you know, it's the whole, I want to tell you everything about my product on the first date, right? I want to tell you my entire life story. We've only just met, but let me tell you about all the dirty laundry.
Like super excited.
Because I'm super excited, and, you know, let's get straight into the weeds. And, you know, the things to look for here are, if your website talks about your internal business processes, that's a major red flag, because here is the uncomfortable truth. No one cares about your business, right? They only care about how what you do will make their life better. Right? Yeah. So if you're talking about your internal business processes, that's a sleeper. Again, I've gone to watch cat videos really, really quickly, right? If you're talking about how those internal business processes will make my life better, so in other words, you're telling me the benefits of working with you, I'm interested, because it's a conversation about me, right? So how you unfold your story, you know, resist that urge to go straight into the weeds and tell me everything. Focus on, how does your product make my life better? Be clear about it, because then I'm interested, and then I'm going to engage deeper with your brand, and then I will be ready to sign up to something. I will be ready to download the white paper, which goes into all the detail, right? So there's a time for it. It's just that that's not what you lead with. So again, these are small, you know, these are smallish changes, but they require different perspective, and they require definitely outside help. Because if you're sitting in your business and you're thinking about your business day in, day out, you lose the ability to be objective. And so working with a great digital agency gives you that objectivity, because they can step you through the process.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really key point, the one which I think people often want to, they want to get to the end and they want to get the quick answer. And I mean, that's probably even more of a cultural thing, you know, than anything, with people wanting their fueled by being under pressure. They need money coming in. They think something's going to be a magic bullet that fuels other people's perceived requirement to do things quickly, which then can lead to like those end result things of we just need to tell people that they've got to call us and they've got to do this, instead of, you know, that idea that it's going to be an extra 2 steps ahead, that they can take out the other 2 or 3 of just like, hey, I'm just getting to know you and build, you know, the trust, which is pretty basic human thing to do. You know, is you don't, you know, there's no, you know, it's in, I mean, we go to any networking group or anything, you know, and people will just say, here's my card, just give me a call. You know, oh, okay, see ya. And then, well, I won't ever do that, because I don't even know your name. But you know, it's just really, it's nice then to, I guess, hear that as well, and that the AI and the thought that you've, I guess, put into this tool is sort of thinking on that angle. I think that's really interesting to me, like being in the world of apps and seeing it sort of change, especially over the last however many years, like I guess, you know, 10 to 12 years since we had been developing and designing apps, and seeing why people like apps and websites. So I've been more in the world of like web apps and apps on the app stores, So I guess as a segue into like another question there too, is that have you seen for people, who've had a website, and I guess actually just a side question, does it also then integrate them with apps? It's not just about websites, it's also the analytics like for apps and things too, obviously, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the adore process itself, right, and the markers that you put into it, we can apply that to anything. We can apply it to online dating. We are indeed doing that. We can apply it to professional development and leadership coaching to get a measure of, how you're progressing in that relationship with yourself and your personal development. We can apply it to how you're tracking on a website. We can apply it to how is your app working, right? So at the moment, when you jump on Ramp, the language is uses Google Analytics language. So, to apply it to an app, you simply have to map the parameters. So it won't be site visitors, it'll be app downloads and so on.
Yeah. So then have you seen, or do you have any examples, or sort of seen any trends in relation to, like, people say with apps or things where, say, like their business model has evolved and they had a certain application or a specific online business, and in a time period now gone where that was super popular and they saw a really strong sort of lot of traffic coming through a certain channel of theirs, and then that's changed. Have you seen like any trends emerging, I guess, in terms of the popularity or lack of that, in terms of people's use of, say, apps on the App Store, from that side of things?
Yeah, look, quite openly, I'm not the right person to ask about that, right? So for us, we treat all the different marketing channels in aggregate, and we give you a read on the aggregate relationship that you have with your entire target audience. So we're not in the space of attribution.
Got it. Yep.
So, the 0-second milestone, the very first milestone inside RAM, looks at the net effect of all of your marketing. So whether that was through Facebook or whether it was through downloads on the App Store, whether it was through some campaign that you ran on Instagram or TikTok or wherever, we look at the net effect of all of that and assume that in the website sense that the traffic is coming to your website from all the marketing efforts that you're doing out there, organic, paid, etc. Right? So at the moment, there are people, and again, this is where you go, well, what is the right subspecialty to ask the question of? And it would be someone who specializes in marketing performance.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. No, I just thought, I thought there may have been, but that also, I guess, answers like another question too, like about how it's more of a, it's a impartial tool that's just looking purely at the data, and then and then everyone else, it's then handed over to other people to do their thing as required.
Yeah, exactly. So
then just sit back and go, wow, that's a great amount of information. I should do something about it one day.
I know, right? So I think that coming back to sort of pulling the conversation together into what we've been talking about, we often say that as long as there is a human being on the other side of the computer screen who's making the decision to buy, because ultimately, if you're in business, you need someone to make a decision to buy. So as long as those decisions are being made by human beings, right, we need to develop a relationship with that human being. And the awesome thing is that as human beings, we develop relationships in a systematic way. Like there is an algorithm to how we form relationships. And it's all based on this idea that of incremental trust building, right? So you need to build trust, and as a human being, you can't fast track that, with a couple of caveats, right? If you get a strong endorsement from someone that you trust, you do fast track the relationship forming, the trust building part of the process, because it's kind of like if you think of the 6 markers, if you get a referral from someone who you trust personally, it fast tracks the first 3 markers and lands you in the middle of the relationship. But outside of that, human beings have a certain pattern to how they form relationships, right? And so because of that pattern, and because the relationship evolves in digital, we can measure the progress. And it's kind of exciting. It's a different lens for looking at all of this. And the thing that we're just really, really excited about at RAMP is not only the ability to bring objectivity to a field which is fragmented and fuzzy, but to really bring insights and marketing strategy that were previously only available to really big companies with really big budgets to the average business owner, so that they can answer those questions around, what is the thing that I should do next? I'm so confused. I want to grow my business. I want it to be successful, but what is the one thing that I should do next? And so we help with that. And if we can help people be more successful in that, it creates better lives. It gives people more time for coffee and holidays. What's not to love about that?
Yeah, I mean, it very much strongly sort of resonates with me too, because I've always had, it's just me, like a strong love for equally creative things and technical things, and where those two things meet, that I guess that fueled a little bit of why I asked those other questions about the way it sort of analyzes. Well, it doesn't, I guess, strictly speaking, analyze branding, but it analyzes the results of the effects of, or the lack of effects of it on
exactly
on the in the tool, your website or your app. So, like, understanding that idea, which is why I asked it, I think, in about 3 different ways before, because I was just trying to get my head around, like, how other people, like other business owners, would interpret that and actually think about it. Because for some people it's super easy. They're like, oh yeah, 100% understand it. And other people are like, I just really, that frustrates me, and I don't like need to understand it either, which is fine. I mean, if they need to understand it, that's good. You're probably much better just doing the things you're good at. But still, it's still great information. But in my experience, though, this is just like something that I've found, is that I've found over the years, with a few exceptions, that even when people say, and this is like not just non-technical people or non-people in our industry, but people in general, when they say, look, I'm really not interested, I don't understand it, it frustrates me, and they get angry by it. I found that whilst that on the face of it is true, I found most of the time it's just because they have never been shown a good, easy way to understand it. Is that it's not that they don't, I mean, they kind of say it, but that's just really the result of it always being presented to them in a way. It's obviously a lack of a willingness, perhaps, but if you overlook that and just don't go, well, it's their fault, is that they just need to have a way that is, that has data and something more concrete, that they can like hang their hat on, that is better. I mean, it still might not be the exact, perfect way that they would idealize in their brain. It'd be just like one thing, like standing in front of them, and they're like, oh yeah, that's it. It's more complicated, but still a better way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll tell you another story, right?
Oh, good.
Here's another
like
story.
stories.
So I'll start here. I am sure that most businesses, no matter what size they are, collect Google Analytics, right? They collect the Google Analytics, and maybe some people actually log into that dashboard and have a look inside there. And I've been in the space for many, many years, and I've worked with a full range of different brands and different people and so on. And to date, I still have never met a single person, including myself, right, who can look inside Google Analytics and go, oh, of course, this is exactly what we should do next month, because I'm looking at all this data that we're collecting, or you look at a mixed panel dashboard with all these graphs and dials and data and things pointing in every which way. And to look at that and go, oh, of course, we need to take a look at our call to actions because they're not being effective, right?
Yeah.
That just doesn't happen, right? So, the ability to bring clarity and something really usable and intuitive to this space and make it evidence-based, I think is a really, really exciting thing. So
Yeah,
here's the story. When I was a kid, I used to think that relationships were something magical, right? Like you either lucked out and you had good friendships and you had good relationships, or you didn't. Things like studying for a maths test. That's really tangible. You can put the work in and you get a grade based on how much work you put in. Swimming training, you put the work in training and you see your times going down, right? Direct correlation. Relationships, something mysterious and magical, and some people were good at it and some people weren't good at it, right? And so 10, 15 years ago, I came across this article in the New York Times, and the article was called "To Fall in Love with Anyone, Do This," right? And I'm like, what is this magic, right? Anyway, long story short.
Oh, that's a call to action. I'll click on that.
Right. So it caught my attention, and I read the article and I thought, this is a bunch of, censor the next word, BS. This is what? Like, no way. There is no formula for love. I was very cynical about it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it piqued my curiosity. So I went and I looked at the original research out of Columbia University. And it was a professor called Aaron and a bunch of his colleagues. And they were looking at effectively, what is the formula for love? How do we form relationships as human beings? And so got interested in that, and I thought, well, if you can get two people to fall in love, why can't you get a person and a brand to fall in love? And this is again my very commercial lens of how do we turn this into something which will have commercial benefit for business owners. And so that's where it all started. And so I think it's that, what you were talking about before, where things are kind of fuzzy and confusing, and what do we do? What do we make of all of this? That's true until you can put a really crisp and clear formula behind something. And, there is, I think it's not, I always think it's Winston Churchill, but it's actually not. It's someone else that had said, I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one, right? You'll be able to look up and see who that's attributed to originally. But, I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. And it's like, at face value, you can look at Google Analytics and you can look at Hotjar and you can look at Mixpanel and all of those things, which are very useful. I'm not at all saying that they don't have their place, but, they're not really intuitive and they don't give you a sense of what you need to do next. And so being able to put a formula to how we form relationships so that you can look at something and instantly know, this is how much my site visitors love my brand, right? This is where the weaknesses in the relationship with my target audience are. And importantly, this is what I need to do next to uplift the quality of that relationship. Like, that's a really cool thing. And, it's really simple and it's really intuitive. And interestingly, one of the comments that we get when we run people through a demo, especially agencies that are used to using a lot of detailed analytics, is that, how can this be so simple? Right. And so, our answer to that is, well, we worked a really long time to write you a short letter. We could have sent you a long one, right?
Nice. Yes. Boom.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's both really, really funny and also sort of that kind of insight too. Was like, as you were answering that, I was actually thinking my next question was going to be like, how do you overcome, or what do you say to people who have their like suspicions or questions about like how are you able to do that? Like, how is it so easy when everything else that I see is so complicated? And you just answered that.
That's it. So, ultimately the litmus test is, what's your conversion rate? So if your conversion rates are 2-3% and 97% of your marketing budget is ineffective, and you want to fatten that pipeline, you want to fatten your marketing funnel, do something about it. And this is a way to figure out exactly what you need to do. So, it's sort of like, again, you can take the opinion away. Do you trust it? Do you not trust it? Well, have a crack at it. And if it's giving you results, it's your answer.
Yeah, well, there's an element, I mean, in diving into something, there's like, well, what's the risk? You have to have a little bit of faith in things. Like I'm a big believer that there's obviously a tipping point with lots of things that you haven't tried. You can't be, I mean, you can either go, oh, I don't know about that because I was like burnt a few other times and that's really left a big scar on me. And I'm pretty, I'm really hardened up now. I'm not going to do anymore. Or you can just go, well, maybe this time will be good. Sounds really interesting.
Yeah, for
Anna's
sure.
has some great stories. Anna's got some great stories. She explains it really
yeah.
well. No, but it's really great. And I think it's certainly, anything that helps, even if it ends up helping a little bit, and sometimes have a disproportionately large effect on just people's even, this is probably a big call, but I know in some elements it's true. It can have a disproportionately large effect on changing people's minds about the use of digital tools in general, because people are, one, overwhelmed, two, they use heaps of stuff, they're busy, they're like, it didn't work for me, see you later, and
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes from lack of confidence, and lack of confidence comes from lack of trust and lack of prior success. And so getting some wins on the board and getting some understanding, it often turns people who are very skeptical into people who are not skeptical anymore. And this is where, things like formulas and algorithms, they all give people shortcuts to getting a whole lot of understanding in a really simple way. Right. So, I often joke that typically if you take someone who's very cynical, and in the beginning with Ramp, we were doing workshops. Now it's a button, right? So you don't have to sit through a 2-hour workshop with me. You can press a button and there you go. You get your insights in 30 seconds, which I'm sure most people will say is far more enjoyable than sitting through a 2-hour workshop. But nevertheless, in the workshops, and especially with the, some audiences are more cynical than others. There are those audiences, as you said, we've been burnt before, we've tried marketing before, it hasn't worked for us, it's a waste of money and time, it's all fuzzy, we don't trust it because it's not concrete, right? And the other good one that always comes up is all our work is by word of mouth. We don't need digital because all our work is word of mouth. And that's like terrific. But you know what? If you want to expand into a geography where you don't know Bob and his neighbor, Sue, and you can't pick up the phone, you're going to have to rely on digital at some point in time. So typically in those workshops, it would take 17 minutes to turn the biggest cynics into believers. And the reason why it only took 17 minutes, and don't ask me why, I guess I got bored after hundreds of workshops and I started timing this. So, but the reason why it took such a short amount of time is that as soon as you give someone a formula and you say, this is the process for how we form relationships, and on a human to human level, you completely understand it. Like you go, yeah, sure, we need to have an opportunity. I need to pass the first impression. And then we need to align on life stories and values. And only then is there an exchange of value where we make a commitment. We don't move in together after the first date. That would be absurd. We don't get married on the first date. That would be absurd, right? So it follows a particular cadence and it evolves in a very, like once you think about it in that way, you're like, well, of course, I've just never thought about it that way. But the process itself is really, really simple. And so because everyone can identify with that because it's so human, as soon as you go, well, we're now taking that, we're capturing that and putting it into digital, because at the end of that computer screen, there is still a human being who's trying to make a relationship with your brand. The process is the same. And so I think that's often the thing that turns cynics into people who are willing to give it a go.
Yeah, no, I think that's the correlation between humanity and digital is an important one that people often do separate, and rightly so. I mean, there's it's a hard well, not hard, but it's at first glance, it's a bit of a hurdle for people just to jump over, to go, oh yeah, I can see yes, actual people go to your website and then they actually call you,
Mhm.
but like the actual tools and the information that you can gain really from what is for most people their primary source of new income, for their
Mhm.
business and then for their lives and for their family, all these things that have a
Mhm.
direct human correlation. To separate them is really, is not really right. That's not very sensible either, but it's a it's the main tool for most people. So
Mhm.
it should be, I guess, treated with respect, you should say, but treated with the given the right food, almost like feeding it with the right sort of tools and information, so it can perform, so it can do what it really should be doing for you. Because it's
Mhm.
not just like showing you things or telling people things; it's also then you know giving very important information about what people like.
That's it. And
Well,
we're used to doing this in other aspects of our lives, right? So everyone listening has gone to a doctor. You go to your GP and the GP says, do some blood tests. And you go and you do the blood tests and you come back to the GP and they say, your cholesterol is low, high, or, fantastic. And so because you've done the test and the GP tells you that, you go, okay, I get it. Now what should I do next? But if you just went to the GP and the GP looked at you and said, I reckon your cholesterol is off, you'd be like, what? What are you basing that on? That's just your opinion. How do you know?
that's
I
funny.
don't trust this. But as soon as you do a test and you have something which is measurable and objective, you
Yep.
have faith in that. And then when the doctor says, oh, your cholesterol is too high, we recommend this program or, whatever lifestyle changes to remedy that. I mean, it's up to you whether you do it or not, but at least you understand what needs to be done.
Mm,
Right. And I think the first bit is understanding what needs to be done. And then the second bit is actioning that.
mm. Yeah. Well, we had, just like a little thing that popped into my head. Then, I mean, is exactly those real world things that everyone accepts as completely, yeah, like why wouldn't you? Like we had drainage problem in our property some years back, and we never knew exactly why. We had a general idea of why it wasn't draining away through this particular drain that seemed normal. And it was only then, like once we got into the nitty gritty of having like a camera down the pipe, that we found it was not completely, but mostly blocked with roots. And then
Yep.
we had the right information. I mean, that was completely, that wasn't any great um, mystery that I was like, really against doing. I was like, I'm
Mm.
never going to, I'm just going to like see what happens, you know,
Mm.
I'm gonna like had to be resolved. So yeah, there's the jump between that and between physical things you can see and virtual things that, still take up such a big part of all of our lives. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, as we're, I guess, nearing towards the end of the podcast, I'll probably just also at this point ask you too, Anna, if like we've covered like a lot of great stuff like relating to ramp, but is there anything else that you would really, I guess, like to say that you feel that we haven't quite sort of covered? I guess from some really sort of great aspects of it that we haven't really touched on.
I think it's been a pretty wide ranging conversation. And so maybe a good place to finish on is to leave that to the audience.
Hmm.
If for the folks listening, if there are things we haven't covered, send a note to Saul. We'll answer your questions.
Thanks,
Right?
Anna.
Yeah,
That
easy.
should that should be the end of the podcast, but it's not going to be. No,
Oh.
but but we'll splice it
keep
in
them
later.
keep them on their toes, Saul.
Yes, that's right, exactly. But what I will put you on the spot though now, and actually, ask you if there is, say a really great quote or something really relevant that you feel that you can just like pull out of your head right now, or very quickly jump on the computer and Google if you want to.
I can't type that fast. It's not going to happen. So, okay, a great quote.
Well, a great quote or something. It doesn't have to come from like somebody famous like Winston Churchill. It could just come from you, like something that you actually feel would be really relevant as a parting note for everybody.
Well, we've got the one. I didn't have time to write you a long letter, so I wrote you a short one. But
you're a really good one.
Yeah, we've already covered that. And
we have to do another one now.
It'll be too hard to splice that into the end of the podcast. So let me come up with another one. Give me a second. Hang on, give me a second. You'll have to delete this pause here so that it looks like I came up with it straight away.
No, it just means that it means a lot to you.
Okay. All right. I'll finish on another story. Here we go.
Oh, good.
I don't have any financial kickback from what I'm about to say. I wish I did, but I went and saw Air on the weekend. The Nike Air movie.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, it was fabulous, absolutely fascinating, and it tells the story not of Michael Jordan as a player, but of his contribution to really accelerating and turning Nike from like a marginal brand into a dominant brand. It's fascinating. And so in there, Phil, the CEO, turns to Sonny and he says to him, because, they're taking a big risk here. They're putting all of their budget behind this Michael Jordan, who is an unknown rookie player, right? So they can't afford to do it as a business. Their heads are on the chopping block if this doesn't go right. And so they make this call and, Phil, the CEO, turns to Sonny and says, you don't get remembered for the rules that you keep to. You get remembered for the rules that you break. And so I think that's a really salient thing. Like, people remember you for the rules that you break. But to bring that back into something practical and pragmatic, you've got to understand what the rules are first. Otherwise, It's sheer chaos. So understand what the rules are. Don't treat the whole digital space and conversion rates and digital marketing and all of that as just one giant fuzzy heap that scares you or frightens you away. Empower yourself, get some understanding, and then break the rules, but know why it is and do it with deliberate action rather than chaos. And,
See, that was in thinking about what the quote was going to be, you came up with something even better. So that was,
as long as you cut that silence bit, we're good to go.
No, that's going to stay in. No, that's all right. No, it just sounds like it really meant a lot to you, which I know it did.
It did. It was a really impactful.
No, that's great. I've actually been thinking about that myself. I saw the little snippet on that the other day, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a good film, a great story.
It was a great story. Like, totally go and see it.
Yeah.
And then sign up to Ramp.
Yeah, exactly. So just before we finish up, just tell people how best to get in contact with you, Ramp, and where they need to go online.
Probably the easiest thing to do is have a look at ramp.com with 2 M's, like ramp, right? So ramp.com, and get in contact through that. Like, if you send me an email, the easiest thing is booking a 15-minute call with me. We can have a chat and I can help you get started.
That sounds fantastic, Hannah. And thank you so much for spending the time with me to run through all those. Really great conversation. And
it's been fun.
Yeah, really, really enjoyable. And thank you once again, everybody, for listening to our podcast. And before we go, like Anna said before, please leave any feedback as well as any suggestions for any topics or anything else for that matter that you'd like to know, or actually just go to RAM and have a chat to Anna. And thanks again for listening to the Grow Your Business podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Grow Your Business. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time here at the Grow Your Business podcast.